How's everybody doing? It's Lib Thims here. In the last 2 days, I've been dialoguing with the preschool sub and the kindergarten sub at Reddit. And they've informed me that it is purposeless or pointless to teach 4-year-old children where the letters of the alphabet in reality come from. For example, A comes from the Egyptian Ho, D comes from the Nile Delta, N comes from the Nile N bend of the Nile River, O comes from the ocean of the TO map cosmology of the ancient world, R comes from the ram horn in the sun, in the stars, at the spring equinox. X corresponds to the birth of the cosmos. Out of the X marks the spot point, originally at Heliopolis. Omega corresponds to the yolk of the Milky Way cow, out of which the sun is born. Sampi is the letter of what we now know as Janus, or the two-headed god, marking the end of the year and the beginning of the year. And the 28th letter is the lotus, birthing the new sun out of the Nile waters, which corresponds to the value of 1,000. So here is the new, or the modern way we understand the cosmos. The Earth is circular, and the sun is at the center of rotation of the Earth. And this line right here marks the dividing line between where the sun shines on the Earth and where the sun does not shine on the Earth. And the Earth rotates once every 365 days around the sun. This, however, is a new view initiated by Copernicus, and officially, and other Greek philosophers or astrologers before him. Or rather, physicist before Copernicus. But Copernicus was the official person who said or convinced the modern world that the Earth revolves around the sun. The older models, however, believed that the Earth was flat and that the sun rotated around a flat Earth, and that the moon rotated around the Earth once every 28 days. And 28 is the number of, guess what? The letters of the alphabet. Letter A is the Egyptian Ho. 4, the letter Delta is the letter D, and this goes down. Letter N is when the flood starts. Letter R is the symbol of the ram horn in the sun. In the hot days of summer, the most powerful letter of the alphabet, value 100. You go down to Sampi, which is letter 27th, which corresponds to the Apis bull transforming into Osiris, which corresponds to the Roman god Janus, which corresponds to our month of January, or January 8th. So January 8th and January 9th, or thereabouts, we have the lotus letter. And that is when the sun is born out of the rising lotus, and the alphabet starts again. And it goes back to letter A. So, the point of this video is that if we go back to Egypt, showing my illuminated Earth globe here, which is the modern view, we can zoom in and we can understand where the letters of the alphabet came from. Specifically, the Egyptians used to believe that the Nile River was the trunk of a tree, and that the river went down here, and this is the end branch of the Nile River. And here we see the Blue Nile, which connects to the Ethiopian mountains. And this is where, in January, the snow of the Ethiopian mountains melts, goes down the Blue Nile River, and causes the Nile River to flood for 150 days. And this is where, famously, Noah's flood comes from. And again, the 3 to 4 to 5 cataract branch of the Nile River is where letter N comes from, and this was the shape of the branch of the letter T. Over here we have the Mediterranean Sea, and over here the ancient Egyptians used to believe that another branch of the river ran this way, which we sort of call the Tigris River now. But in the original TO maps, the cosmos, according to Thales and Anaxagoras, who was the first person to draw this so-called Egyptian TO map after he visited Egypt, was that snow melted in the Ethiopian mountains here, went down to the end branch of the Nile River, and then this fresh snow water, which is different from the salty water of the ocean, shown here, which is where letter O comes from, brought fresh water to the Nile Delta. Originally this is sand covered, but the water carried down with it fresh so-called Keem water, which is spelled K-E-M-E, and that's fertile plant soil, and that covered the Nile Delta. And then when you add this heat of the sun, plus the fresh water, plus the fertile soil, black-colored, you can grow plants, and plants are used to make bread. So the whole alphabet cycle is based on the growth of plants to make food. Over here we see the Mediterranean branch of the old TO map. Over here we see the Tigris branch, which was called by a different name in Egypt. And here we see letter A, This is the Egyptian, sacred Egyptian hoe, as Thomas Young called it, 205 plus years ago, or adze as we call it now, which is a etymological variant of this. These are 2 sticks of wood with a rope tied between them, which used to dig soil in Nile Delta so to plant the seeds, which becomes letter A. And the outer ring here is what the Egyptians called the ocean, which is where letter O comes from. So now this is called the ocean. It's still circular shaped, but it's not flat anymore. And T comes from this river system, from the freshwater Ethiopian mountains to the Nile Delta, to the Mediterranean, to the Tigris, to the surrounding letter O ocean. Makes a T shape. This is where letter T comes from. And letter N comes from this N branch of the Nile Delta, which is on our map right here. From here to here to here is what is called the N branch of the Nile Delta. And this was first stated by Eratosthenes, a Greek physicist who was the first person to measure the distance around the Earth, or circumference, which is this line right here, around the entire Earth, about 2,500 years ago. And the letter T, shown here, corresponds to the fact that this T-shaped part of the river refers to the annual flooding of the Nile. And so every year in June, at the start of the summer, the snow melts, the water comes down, makes fresh water, and brings fertile soil from the Ethiopian mountains, and the Egyptians were allowed to grow plants. And this happens once every 365 days. So if you look up the word Nile in Egyptian, the letters N-E-I-L-O-S equals the number 365 days. So that's where time comes from, and that's where the letter T comes from. Other letters we don't fully understand, but the sun, letter S, is what goes over the circumference, or the circle, of this TO map. And other words such as Sirius, which is the star that rises, the minute or the day that this Ethiopian mountain snow melts and hits this letter N branch of the Nile Delta. And when the Egyptians record this, this is when the start of their agricultural year starts. So letter Sirius rises, spelled S-I-R-I-U-S, on June 24th. That marks the start of the Egyptian agricultural calendar, and that's when the alphabet starts. So the flood waters come down here, brings the Keem soil, plus the fresh, no salt water. Again, this is salt water. You can't grow plants in salt water unless they're ocean plants, to the Nile Delta. And out of the tip of this is where the sun is born. Out of the so-called solar egg. And the solar egg, to clarify, is lit by letter number 23, which is called Phi, and that's Hephaestus in Greek, Ptah in Egyptian, and this is where the